Hold on, it's setting up. There we go. Okay, now we are recording.
Awesome.
Oh,
Hi.
Dimitri.
So, yeah, last night was another really beautiful session. Um, we had someone who had never done psychedelics before, who was coming because a colleague had suggested that she look into it. So she's one of those rare people that, at this point, rare people that come in never having done psychedelics who also never read the Michael Pollan book, because pretty much everyone who comes in now has read the Michael Pollan book. So what we did is we just sort of went around the room and I just asked folks um, why they had come to psychedelics. And um, there were several people that, like myself and Brian Murphy, talked about, like, the first interactions with psychedelics, or the first experience with psychedelics came just from drug culture, youth culture. Brian's about 10 years older than me, so he was tripping in the 60s and early 70s, and um, was taking acid, and I took my first psychedelic probably in 1977, so sort of after the heyday of the early psychedelic movement. Um, but a lot of people had similar experiences in that they were just taking it because they wanted to take it, right? Because that's what people took. Everyone just
At
took
this point,
drugs.
it was purely recreational. There was
Pu-
no talk yet of therapeutic benefits of psychedelics.
Well, I think there were therapeutic benefits. Not always. The
But that
only
was
way that
the primary reason people were doing it. People were doing it for recreation. They weren't saying, well,
Right, but the thing is that I don't like to dismiss recreation. I think recreation is really important. I think having a good time is really important. And I think most of the things we know about psychedelics came out of people just having a good time.
okay.
So that was the case for a lot of folks. There were people in that room. Think how many we have yesterday. I think we had 7 people, and then Brian and I. There were a good half the folks there had not done it initially for recreation. So we kind of got out of or fun, you know. So we kind of got out of that, and then we went into, like, what brought us back. And um, there was another guy in there who had done ibogaine, and that brought him back to it, into the psychedelic space, because he sort of had a detour into heroin, and then ibogaine brought him back to psychedelics. But he shared something really interesting that actually is pretty rare in people who are opiate enthusiasts. um, I didn't have any desire to trip the entire time I was on heroin. He would trip every time he would kick. He would go cold turkey, and then he would at some point take some mushrooms or something, and basically it'd be like, "What am I doing?" Or even, actually, he wouldn't even go to turkey. He'd be high on heroin, and I'll tell you why that's rare. It's rare because most opiate users, want to go to sleep. Um, there's a famous, sort of infamous poet and painter, Rene Ricard. And when Rene was asked about whether he wanted to do ibogaine for his opiate, dependency, he shivered and said, in sort of a very flamboyant way that he spoke, "I prefer the doors of my perception tightly closed." Anyways, but this particular member of our group said that every time he would do opiates, that it would be a catalyst for him to, try to get off of heroin in some way. Every time he'd do a psychedelic, it was pretty much mushrooms. Mushrooms don't get you off like ibogaine does, but it was a catalyst for him. So, anyways, there was what it came down to is everyone in the room was doing it for some kind of healing. They had come to it for some kind of, and that was why this young woman who was a young professional, healthcare professional, who had no experience with it, but had this feeling of being disconnected, um, and in a place of, I think the disconnection manifested in, anxiety and fear. And so that was basically the sort of the conversation. And then we got into a conversation around dosage. This poor woman, we were talking about our experiences, and people were talking about 5-MeO and ayahuasca and Syrian rue and mixed with ayahuasca and ibogaine, and like they were pretty horrendous stories for the most part. And when we finally got to her, she's like, why would I do this? Why would you do this? And I guess that's the question. Like, that was pretty much throughout the group. Is like, why? Like, none of us had regrets about our psychedelic experience, or except for the moment, the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes or hour of going back into a psychedelic moment. There is those regrets and questions like, why the fuck am I doing this again? What is happening here? Why would I ever put myself through this kind of hell? And it's not always hell, nor does it need to be. So then we got into that conversation. Why?
And did you come up with a general consensus?
I think what the general consensus is that because these are drugs of perception and perspective, that to be knocked off a baseline sort of brings us back into the ordinary beauty of this world, at least temporarily. And we are able to come up with different ways of being. I cannot in my own path, because my spiritual path has been, my stated spiritual goal is to be a little less of an asshole every fucking day.
Okay.
And that's it. Yeah. And that's it. And I think I am less of an asshole than when I started. I know I am. I'm less of an asshole. And I'm grateful for that.
Do you know that by self-evaluation, or are you getting feedback?
I get feedback. I mean, all you got to, if anyone's ever seen the movie I'm Dangerous with Love, which we started filming 16 years ago, like, I'm not that crazy, I don't think. And maybe that's just a matter of age. And I could also say that, like, I don't know if it's just psychedelics, because I've done like a lot of work on myself to not be such an asshole. I'm still an asshole, but I don't think I'm such an asshole. And I'm actually okay. And I don't know if that's the microdosing, or if it's yoga, or if it's going to therapy in groups, or 12 steps, or shamanic drum circles, or playing the gong several hours a week, or what it is, or maybe a combination of that and getting older and mellower. But I think I'm probably a nicer person. And when I am an asshole, I have a template on which to process. And I think that is a big piece of it. I don't know, the other piece of it, we were talking about dosage again, and I don't think we need to suffer so much with these so-called heroic doses, which I think is bullshit, and this ego death, which is bullshit. That for the egoic journey into ego death, the ego is propelling us to take those big doses, right? The ego has to say, take 3 more grams of mushroom. What else says it? It's not a release, I don't think. And the ego...
Is there any benefit to actually doing that, though?
Yeah, there can be. Here's the thing. I always say biology and biography. Yeah, there's benefit.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the biography? What do you mean by that?
What I mean is it's individual. God, I'll have to come up, maybe we can put it in the footnotes or something. It was just reading it. Oh God, what was his name? Reading a little bit about this doctor's pioneering work on the divergence, biological divergence, not only in species, not only of gender, not only of age, not only of racial or ethnic background, and not only of cultural, meaning what we eat and what goes on, but the divergence of the individual biologically, chemically, so different. I mean, and then the biography is so different. So I think this is the problem with, reductionist research, is that everything is different with every person, everyone's reaction. So this idea that you could have a prescriptive amount of what is needed is just damaging. First of all, untrue, and then damaging. So sure, I've had moments where I've been blasted off and I couldn't come up with this construct of Dimitri. And yeah, it was valuable. I came back and sort of been able to reconstruct myself. And I've gone out there and I've done that, and it was just simply traumatizing. And I had to fucking heal from the supposedly healing event, which I see with a lot of people. So I'm for gentle, just like I'm for fun. I'm for gentle.
Okay.
I think that there's, we're in a, sort of from the therapeutic Western point of view, we're into like, medicine. Give them medicine. MAPS has upped the dosage now for MDMA. Give them more. I don't know. I guess there's some sort of quantitative reason
And are they
for
saying
that.
across the board? Because that would go against what we're just saying, talking about, the biology.
Yeah,
So
they have a protocol. I think protocols are important, but they don't apply for everyone. So I say start out low and see what's going on. And there's I think they also talked about this already, but this is perspective medicine. So there's a difference between the perspective of this third story, looking down or sitting on your garage as a kid and going, wow, the neighborhood, or New Yorker, when you get on top of the building, right? And there's a difference between that and the perspective from an airplane. Oh wow, there's my house, right? And then that and let's say from fucking Mars, right?
okay.
Perspective from Mars.
How would you relate that to a treatment? So maybe to
So
a
it's different types of perspective. I mean, so the perspective from Mars isn't always the best perspective. The perspective from Mars will tell you I'm part of something bigger. It could also say you're small as fucking don't matter. The perspective from the airplane say, oh, I'm part of a community, right? The perspective from the third floor was like, I am part of this block, and that's my car and that's my kids' toys. And I can look at that and see my life and my biography within that. And there's no prescription for that. The shamans want to give you this much to send you off. You got bone, like, wow, not enough wood, I think it's complete bullshit. And it's also part of the hierarchy. It's hierarchical in the way it's administered because it's not allowing the individual to interact, to have agency. The healer in the situation is actually the person taking the medicine. So let's listen to the healer and listen to the wisdom of the body. And then there's the hierarchy of the person who did the biggest dose, the heroic dose.
Okay.
And then we go to those people and we listen. I mean, the prescriptive, I love Dennis McKenna. I'm sorry, I love Dennis McKenna. He's a great guy. Terrence McKenna is what I was trying to talk. I love Terrence McKenna and Dennis. But there's some stuff that's so prescriptive, and as egalitarian as he was, you can see that stuff, that sort of guruism forming, and it's hard not to. It's hard not to create a religion around these things, right? So like, people are running around looking for the, what did he call them? Like some kind of elves, machine elves. Like, unless you got the machine elves, you ain't got shit, Like, I'm sorry.
What's a machine elf? Can you talk
I
about
don't know. It's his fucking narrative. When he smoked DMT.
What's the context that he used it in then?
Yeah, DMT, smoking DMT.
Okay,
That's
so that's
his
the
thing.
context.
That's his.
So he
But
was
all
saying,
this is our own narrative. I mean, if we look at, I think we got to, we really have to expand our philosophy. Look, he's one of the great thinkers. I adore him. Okay, and we can do another talk about my critique. Everyone needs a critique. I adore him. I think he's brilliant. He's so wrong on about three things, but I'm wrong
well,
on
yeah,
about 50 on
yeah.
a daily basis.
It's
But
only
so
3. He's doing pretty good.
yeah. But when I'm saying that, the reason I'm saying that is because these narratives, personal narratives, have nothing to do with the individual. And that's where we create religion around these ideas. That's where we create. And by creating religion, we create hierarchy. By creating systems and ceremonies that are rigid ceremonies, we create hierarchy. And by creating hierarchy, we create dominance and subordinance. And by creating that, we're at the point where we have to really, I'm going way off from what we talked about yesterday, but we really have to re-examine our relationship to almost everything. And not just because it's good for us, but because our relationship, as the great Murray Bookchin said, our personal relationship and our social relationships and our governmental relationships and our corporate relationships and all this stuff dictates how we relate to nature. And how we relate to nature dictates whether we're going to survive, or our kids and our nieces and nephews and grandbabies are going to survive, and what kind of old age you and I are going to have, bro.
Right.
And so if we just can simply recreate these things in psychedelic spaces,
Okay.
I think
Well,
we're in big
let's
danger.
see if we can bring this back to what you said a little bit earlier, almost in the beginning about, I don't remember the exact words you used, but you said something about bringing people back to the basic beauty of nature, or the basic beauty of our life.
Right, right,
So
right,
that's how the conversation started with this woman last
right.
night.
Well, it
So can you
started.
just,
It started.
you know,
We were talking about like what happens when you go out there. Sometimes there was someone who did 5-MeO. He came in a couple of weeks ago, and he was just now 7 weeks being able to, after he went through all this panic and fear, and was really in a debilitating place, been able to see from that experience, or maybe coming out of it, literally being out of it, that there was a beauty to the world. That doesn't always happen with 5-MeO. Some people are just simply damaged.
okay.
Well, with all these things.
So
But
do you
he would,
think, so let's see if I'm understanding this right. So you think like with everyday life, the way we just go through our life, if we're not being introspective or observing, being aware of where we're going, we kind of get lost and we lose sight of
yeah,
the basic
yeah,
beauty of the life, and that the psychedelics can actually help people reconnect with that basic beauty of
right,
life
right, right.
done the right
So,
way.
so you're able to come back. You're removed from baseline, and then come back to baseline and change or view or perceive things in a different way.
Okay. How do you define baseline?
Baseline is normal day reality. Baseline, unfortunately, well, baseline is just, I'm sitting in a coffee shop doing this weekly thing with you. That's my baseline reality. I'm gonna go see my trainer after this, and then go meet friends for dinner. That's baseline reality. I put on my shirt, I go to work, I wipe my ass, whatever. Right? That's baseline reality. To like be taken off of that, and in some cases have nothing to do with the construct of Dimitri, and it that's what the removal from baseline. So, but the thing about baseline is that the goal of psychology and psychiatry um, is to return a so-called sick person um, to baseline. But that's a cultural baseline, and that cultural baseline is basically as a consumer.
Yeah.
So,
So
so
baselines are different for everybody. So your baseline is going to be different than mine.
yeah, but there's a cultural
That won't
baseline. But
happen.
I'll go off on something else. But just to say, as long as we're working within the culture, we're working, as psychedelics is integrated into that um, into the existing um, pharmacracy, and then the existing healthcare systems, and so the psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers, their mission is to return people to functioning members of society. So baseline. So we can view baseline, for instance. Baseline is the day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday, where people line up and trample each other to buy TVs. That would be a baseline activity, not
But
a sickness.
so baseline is not does not imply it's good. Baseline
No,
is
baseline is just
relative
basically
to
shit's at. But
so
that's the
sometimes
state
you
of
might
that's the
want to take
stated
somebody.
goal of psychiatry and psychology. Well, that's the it's not stated. It's the implicit goal is to return you to that. To return you. So
But if
I'm
you
done.
return somebody to an unhealthy baseline,
To
then
return
would
them
your
to be a
goal be
consumer.
to create a new baseline for somebody? So if somebody's
Well,
baseline is not filling their spiritual soul or their self,
right.
um, would the goal then be to try to say, well, listen, let's establish a new baseline for you. Let's
Yeah,
rewrite
but
this
but it's also a tricky deal. Absolutely, that's why we call it disintegration. We don't want people to go back to that. But
disintegration.
yeah, it's a disintegration, not an integration cycle. It's a disintegration. Um, but there's a sort of a incredibly privileged hippie ethos of like go to the Burning Man, or go to Oaxaca and live in a mud hut. Why pay fucking bills, right? And
Right.
so that's a pretty damn, to be able to reject privilege at that level is an incredibly privileged place to be. And that's not most people's reality. So the idea is then, what is psychedelics for? It's either, are we trying to transform society, or are we just trying to get people, look, why's the military interested in psychedelics? Well, if they invest, they want people to go back to baseline, and baseline is, in that case, the objective is to, is for, U.S. domination, the leaders of the free world. And if you're a soldier, your baseline is to, assist, if not directly, then indirectly, in killing and subjugating people. And that's what psychedelics are being used for. And that's why, otherwise, they would not be interested in it.
Okay.
Their job is to kill.
But you described their baseline. So
that's baseline. But it's all our baseline. We sort of collectively say, okay, yeah, we're gonna. This is the idea. We're gonna go into this with the idea of. We're going into this. We accept this. Now, psychedelics can remove you from that baseline, but it has to be part of the intention and part of the culture. Otherwise, it'll just take you back to that baseline. Maybe reaffirm, make you a damn good killer. As
some people would have
General Patton said.
I would think, by that definition, people have a shifting baseline.
Yes.
A soldier who's on deployment has a baseline when they're in the theater. But when they come home, now they have to establish a different baseline. So now, would you think that psychedelics can assist in that shift? Because you can't have the same baseline in, the suburbs of the United States as you do.
Well, they say it can. I mean, it's the advertisement that they can totally heal from post-traumatic stress. Now, that's a set of criteria that for that diagnosis. I think that one of the beauties of the human spirit, and is that we feel guilt, remorse, and shame for things that are shameful and should produce guilt and remorse. So I'm not saying that, vets should just be sentenced to suffering. I mean, my father's a vet, my uncle was a vet, my family members are vets. My uncle was in Iwo Jima and suffered greatly, and I don't think that's his fault. But to say that you can use we're going down a rabbit hole here. But to say that that psychedelics will just simply remove post-traumatic stress, and ain't that a grand thing? First of all, it might reduce or eliminate, in some cases, the symptoms for post-traumatic stress. But there's all kinds of other stuff that comes from killing people and watching your friends die, other than post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress is interesting because what it's also saying is we can return them to baseline, to being a good worker, to being a good cog, because that's interfering with the job. Okay, similarly to the way cognitive therapy came up after World War II. It was going to be a 12 treatments. You didn't have to go into the murky, dark underside. People came back from World War II, got over that shit, and went back to work. So for any of us who were raised by World War II vets, we're still feeling the effects of that war. Sure. Because that shit doesn't go away. And I'm really grateful that it doesn't go away. I'm grateful that we have these things. Whether it's morality is sort of inherent in us is a different conversation, and one that we could go down. But I guess we bring it back to the group. This woman's baseline, and she's a healer, was that she was feeling less effective. She was feeling disconnected. And in that case, we can explore baseline, but we have to be really careful. On the one hand, there's trying to, the goal is to fit people into, to make them better killers or salespeople or mothers or whatever that means, right? And on the other hand, it's totally free yourself up and, leave this society. I think for my goal with working with people, it's just trying to relieve suffering.
Okay. And did you come to any kind of conclusion with this woman last night in the group?
She is interested in the medicines. She's interested in exploring this thing we call spirituality. She's going to come back. She actually didn't do much reading, so she's going to do some of the reading. And is that the only way for her? She's looking for connection. I suggested other ways of connection, going to spiritually, meditation, yoga, other ways of connection. Um, but I think my feeling is that she will be back, and maybe
Okay.
she will, and maybe she won't. I don't think this is the cure all for anything.
Okay. And how did she
Um,
find out about the group?
through a colleague
Through a colleague. Okay. Who is a member of the group? Who
who's a
has
member who comes to the group. Yeah.
All right. Well, it sounds like maybe this would be a good place to wrap this one up.
Yeah, I don't think we got anywhere. Awesome.
Yeah, no,
No, that's what I want to get to know her.
we're talking about like, the vets from World War II and how it passes on to generation to generation. We could save that for our next one.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, man. I'm gonna end the recording here.
Okay, cool.
Hang on. Okay.